Hi everyone, welcome. Thank you for coming today. For those of you that are online, also welcome. Today I have the pleasure, or we have the pleasure of having Fredericks, Fredericks as our speaker today. And Eric is now recently moved to the Freight Policy Coordinator at Caltrans. And prior to that, he was the Freight Integration Manager at the Office of Freight Planning at Caltrans. And he has been working with Caltrans for several years and basically pushing forward different projects from kind of inception to reality in different fields of freight and looking into electric trucks, truck parking, ports, inland waterways. He has ample experience in planning, got a master's in Urbana-Champaign. And
Bachelor's.
the bachelor's.
I'll take the upgrade.
Yes. And also have experience working in several agencies in Florida, California, several agencies, and also Illinois. So welcome. Thanks again for being here.
Thank you, Miguel. Appreciate it. And thanks for all of you for attending. I didn't realize we'd have such a big in-person audience, so it's great to see you all. And this is my first in-person meeting of any kind in like 2 years, so it's super cool to be here with you today. You may have noticed that my title of my presentation changed a little bit from Caltrans to California's Transportation Agency, since I switched jobs in the middle of the time from when I sent the presentation. So I am at the State Transportation Agency now, but working along on the same issues. So thanks a lot for having me. So I don't know if any of you have been paying attention lately, but there's somebody that everybody's been talking about, but we're not really supposed to be talking about. You know, this guy, Vladimir Putin. No, actually, it's Bruno. Everybody's talking about Bruno, and they keep saying we're not supposed to talk about Bruno. So I figured a lot of you may not know, but Bruno is a character in the Disney movie Encanto out now, and it was the #1 song in America. It's called "We Don't Talk About Bruno." So, but I want to tie it a little bit into the port congestion issues that in the supply chain. That's the other thing that everybody's talking about these days. And we're at Disneyland, took a little vacation since COVID went down this past weekend. And my daughters were looking for a Mirabelle dress, and they could only find one in like all the stores all over Disneyland. And Mirabelle is the main character in the movie Encanto. And we kind of figured that this is why, because the supply chain issues, that all these ships are slow steam moving across the Pacific Ocean, headed for the ports of LA Long Beach, mainly some to Oakland. And part of the reason they're doing that is because they were all congesting right near the ports of LA Long Beach because they couldn't move all the containers and things inland because the warehouses are full. There's lots of equipment issues, things like that. So instead of waiting here right near the ports of LA and Long Beach, they've been slowly moving across the ocean so that air quality is improved. And one of the things that you may know is that a lot of the ships are capable, I think almost all the major huge ocean carriers, of coal ironing or shore power. That's where they can plug into the electrical grid and not burn their diesel or bunker fuel as they're sitting in the harbor. But when they're at anchor or near the ports, all that pollution was going into the LA Long Beach region. So now we're seeing them move slower. And one of the cool things that's come out of it for me personally is that there's been a lot more interest in the supply chain. So I heard you all like to hear about what people do in their jobs. So one of the reasons why I think it came over to Calsta is that we were helping them when I was at Caltrans on the supply chain metrics dashboard to kind of show key metrics about what's going on in the supply chain. I can't show you all of the data because this is recorded and some of it's proprietary and I'm not allowed to share it. Some of this actually is a little bit, but I think they'll forgive me because a lot of this gets out to the media. But this is like one example of containers that have come in and they're sitting on the docks of the ports of LA Long Beach for more than 8 days. And you can see a few weeks ago, there was over 120,000 containers, and that's come down 72% since then. And that's an issue because the more containers that you have sitting at the ports, you can't get all the goods through. So this is something that we track from the data that comes from the ports. And then we get special data from the Pacific Maritime Services. And we have some cool graphs and stuff we couldn't show, but they track this. This is the number that's coming across the ocean right now. They're technically in Q, but they're out in the middle of the ocean or down by Mexico where the weather is a little better. But you can see it's starting to come down, the vessels in Q, but we're still 50% above what we were a year ago. And historical levels are more toward near, a couple anchoring or loitering, definitely no Q. And then here's another example of like, we track the in-stock rates. So that's how much consumer packaged goods like cleaning supplies and snacks and things that are on the shelves. In California, it's like about 90% stocked. We're doing pretty well. Some states are definitely more having issues. We're tracking the empty containers at the ports, how many that need to be moved because they're, again, taking up space. And this is a sweeper tracker that the US Maritime Administration, they're trying to get these empty containers moved by having vessels come in. But the issue is there's so many vessels being used all over the world, it's really hard to get those containers moved out. So I figured I'd show you a little cool thing that we've been working on that we update. It does take quite a bit of time. The dashboard, unfortunately, is behind, we can't share all the data. We do share this with the governor's office each week. And a lot of the executives meet on our task force to see how they can tackle some of the issues. So also just thought while I was on this topic, this is kind of some of the things that I do on a daily basis. Have interagency meetings with like the governor's office of business and economic development, the California Air Resources Board and the Energy Commission, especially to talk about the move to zero emission, medium heavy duty vehicles, clean vessels, waterborne vessels. Also meeting with the US EPA, a lot on issues. We'll get into some of that. And partner agencies, especially the ports lately. I'll talk about a few of those projects. And then the private sector, like sometimes warehousing, truck stops, and then advocacy organizations like the California Trucking Association, sometimes environmental justice groups. We talk with about issues of air pollution and noise and things around the ports and how we can help with that. We also organize a California Freight Advisory Committee that meets about every quarter usually, or 3 times a year, where we bring all together these different advocates to talk about, or agencies that talk about freight issues in California. We also do things like presentations, researching and writing plans and guidance. That's a lot of our time. I'll talk about a few of those plans and guidance. Fire drills, I'm sure all of you experienced that, and a lot of data requests we get sometimes, say from the media, like in instance, somebody will ask, what's the value of goods moving over Donner Pass? That's the I-80. Because when there's a closure due to snow or a mudslide or things, the media wants to know, like, how much is this costing us by have these trucks go maybe to Southern California? Managing studies and participating in research, and I'm going to talk about some of those. We help scope models like the California statewide travel demand model, the freight forecasting model, and try to look at new data and ways that we can incorporate that. And then at Caltrans headquarters, we provide support to the districts on their projects. We work with them on truck parking types of projects, and then other freight projects, freight ITS, and moving zero-emission trucks forward. And in the question and answer, I can talk more about my career arc, as I understand that some of you like to hear how I got here. So I was mentioning about plans, and kind of the overarching plan for freight transportation in California is a California Freight Mobility Plan. It was last updated in 2020, and these are the state and federal laws that kind of guide that statutorily mandates of the plan. It's a really interesting document if you get a chance to read it. And here, I won't read the vision statement, but environmental goals, sustainability, economic competitiveness, those are some of the paramount vision and guidance and goals of the plan. So I encourage you to talk about that. I'm going to focus a little bit more on some sustainability pieces and the implementation of plans, as this is kind of more of the guiding vision. But this is really where we look to for how we move forward in California from a freight perspective. And it's also a requirement to get the federal funds to California. There's federal national freight dollars that come into California. And those projects that are going to receive funding have to be in this plan. So I'm not going to spend too much time on some of these, but there's a whole set of laws and executive orders that have kind of led up to this. So that's going to give you brief highlights. So AB 32, I'm sure you've all heard of, the Global Warming Solutions Act. It's under Governor Schwarzenegger. That's kind of like this overarching, setting off all these different things. We've had SB 743 looking to reduce VMT, SB 375, and linking to general plans. They don't mention freight as much, but that's because freight is very complex in terms of VMT and such. But it does influence, because you always get questions about, hey, how do we reduce freight VMT? And it's like, well, that's a little complicated. You don't want to send freight to less clean places. So, and then the CAPTI, which is a recent plan, the Climate Action Plan for Transportation Investments. I always forget it. Sorry if I messed it up, somebody out there, but that really aligns all the funding programs with state climate goals. Some of the great executive orders that as B 3215 by Governor Brown really pushed forward the sustainable freight plan. And then 5518 carbon neutrality by 2045. That really sets all the targets of like, how are we going to get to a carbon neutral California. In 1919 by Governor Newsom, that's pushing more toward making sure all of our spending and investments are sustainable. And then 79-20, this is really pushing for a zero-emission vehicle future where drayage trucks would be 100% zero emission by 2035. Those are the trucks going kind of back and forth to ports, distribution centers. And then like the long haul trucks would be zero emission by 2045. All right. So the California Sustainable Freight Action Plan, again, came from that executive order, a multi-state agency collaboration, because all these different agencies were working on freight, but they weren't really coming together to create a comprehensive plan. So there are state agencies and implementation steps and 3 project pilot concepts. And those involved a dairy biomethane project in the Central Valley, and then a border project at the Mexican border to make freight more sustainable down in San Diego and Imperial counties. And then advanced truck corridors in kind of the LA Inland Empire, looking at technologies in zero emission vehicles and that. And then 2030 straight freight targets. These people talk about it as the 3 pillars of the plan. So I'll start from the bottom. The economic competitiveness, setting targets, establishing targets. There's been a work group that's been working on this and has come up with targets now to help make sure that California doesn't lose market share to other states. Deploy over 100,000 zero emission vehicles and equipment by 2030. I think we're well on our way to hitting that goal. And then this interesting one, increase freight efficiency by 25%. So if you think about freight, we kind of have the freight global domestic product in California. And we want that to kind of go up while your emissions are going down. So your numerator is like a fraction. Your numerator, GDP goes up while your GHG goes down. That's how you increase freight efficiency. Which sounds good in theory, but it's a lot more challenging. It doesn't quite work the way you want it to because there are issues with how freight GDP is calculated. So it's like every year apples and oranges kind of, literally apples and oranges kind of change in your North American international codes, the NITES. Yeah, so the freight industry itself is changing, so you can't really compare year to year. And then how the GHG is calculated also changes when models get updated and your baseline goes back retroactively and changes. So it's one thing to look at, and I think we're gonna smash this target out of the park. We're probably gonna be like 50, 60%. I don't know exactly what we'll end up being in 2030, but you know, it's not quite as useful as one might hope. Oops, I think this is a duplicative slide. So I'll move. Oh, there are state agency actions and implementation steps in the plan. I think there's around 73. And Caltrans was assigned about 30 of them. So I'm going to talk about some of the projects that came out of this. So here's all the projects that Caltrans was responsible for. I know it's kind of hard to see, but I'm going to go into some of these. I'll take a kind of a look. I'd say the plan is very ambitious. And we didn't really get the resources at Caltrans to be able to take on a lot of this. But so we kind of had to pick and choose what we could focus on. One cool thing that we worked on was a freight-focused guidance on Caltrans reviews local development projects everywhere. I used to do that for my job, so I knew about every project going on here in Davis. You know, all the controversies and such. But statewide, we didn't really have freight-focused guidance on how can we help move zero-emission vehicles and such along. So we created some guidance for viewers, and I know you can't read this, but it asks questions about like on-street parking, package pickup and drop-off. Do you have zero-emission infrastructure? Because if somebody's building a big warehouse and we have all these regulations coming, which I showed you before, you really should be thinking now about how are you going to design your building to accommodate charging infrastructure for your fleets or for those coming in? What about truck parking, providing more on-site parking when we have such a shortage in California? Worker safety considerations, rail considerations, bicycling infrastructure, pedestrian layouts and things specific to freight facilities. So a couple more that I'm going to get into is electric charging infrastructure, park trucks, and truck parking. Let's start with truck parking. So we formed a statewide, right after the plan is developed, we realized there wasn't kind of a committee or anything that was getting together to talk about truck parking. We really needed to bring people together to start discussing this. So we worked with a lot of different agencies in the California Trucking Association, the Harbor Trucking Association, to bring all these groups together and start figuring out like, how can we solve this truck parking shortage? I don't know if you all know, but there's regulations that truck drivers have to follow, that they have to take mandatory breaks. When they hit this kind of clock, let's say it could be 11 hours. It just depends on how long they traveled, some 14 hours. They have to take a mandated break. Usually it's like 10 hours. And they are tracked by GPS units in the trucks now. So if they move their truck, they could get fined by the federal government for even moving their truck. So it's a pretty serious aspect. And then if there's no truck parking somewhere and a truck driver just parks along a freeway or a freeway ramp or something, they could be ticketed by the highway patrol. So you've got this dilemma. It's like, I can either be fined here or ticketed here. And so that's why you see late at night that our studies found that between 12 and 1 a.m., that's when we have the highest demand for truck parking. And so we realized we didn't have data, so we needed to that would look at all this GPS data that's out there now and be able to assess where the truck drivers are parking. I guess this one's not as good of an example, but we have all the points of where truck drivers are actually parking. A lot of times in our ramps, there are other areas where it's not really safe. And I'm going to get into some of the safety aspects, but this is our total truck parking deficit at peak hour. So we have more than 5,500 spaces that were short where these drivers could be ticketed. And even the ones that are finding spaces, they're spending up to almost an hour a day trying to find a space. If you think about that, that comes directly out of their pocketbook. That's lost revenue for them. And then here's the other aspect. what's crazy is I don't think anybody in California knew till we did this study that we have an average of almost one parked truck per day getting hit in California. And you can just imagine, how catastrophic that is when you're colliding into these massive trucks. So we're having a fatality about every 10 days or so, and it's probably a miracle that it's not higher. So, this has become a pretty serious problem. And this is not accounting for driver fatigue that's leading to collisions. So on top of that, you also have truck collisions, maybe as a result of truck parking problems. So we have, as part of the study, a truck parking feasibility guide that gets into the design. Here's some of the examples. I think this was maybe looking at a parcel of land down in San Diego County that we're trying to rethink about, like, how do we use our vacant land that we have to maybe put facilities for truck drivers on it. We also have a private-public partnership plan because we want to see truck parking getting built at truck stops as well, and how we could partner to get public funds to private truck stops. So I know some of you are really into data here, so I wanted to geek out for a moment. This was kind of my baby of the plan, is a truck parking demand model. So this is to try to estimate the number of truck parking spaces needed by new developments that are coming in. Because part of the issue is that the truck driver has to go and deliver and pick up goods and whatnot at shipping and receiving facilities, but there's nowhere for them to park. And we didn't really know what is the demand for at these facilities for truck parking. So we don't have the issue of trucks parking all over on ramps and whatnot. So we did a GPS data collection for all of San Diego County. We did a case study down there. And so we were able to track all the stops. And so we found some, in our consultant Cambridge Systematics, found that about 10% of all stops at these facilities, manufacturing, warehouse, transportation, logistics, about 10% of them, a truck had parked before they came into the facility. And then, so of those trucks that park, these are the ones that are arriving at the same time at these types of facilities. So let's walk through some math. So if you had about 200 trucks going there at a facility per day, let's say it's transportation and logistics. So you'd have 20 trucks parking throughout the day. But those trucks are coming at different times. Some might come together, and about 42% of those are coming at the same time. So would that be like eight trucks are coming at the same time, right? So we'd need about 8 spaces at transportation and logistics facilities for those trucks that are coming at the same time. So that's how you determine your demand for trucks. So thank you for bearing with me for that, because I'm totally excited about this. So how we can do that is tie it back to our program. Remember, I told you we look at all the development projects in California. Now we can say to them, hey, you got this. They always do traffic studies about how many trucks are coming per day. Now we can say, hey, this is how much demand you have for those spaces. And then I mentioned about the electric charging for trucks. This one's really complex because I think the zero-emission trucks are coming. I mean, they're already out there. The real issue is about the infrastructure of where the charging facilities can go, or hydrogen fueling facilities. And then where can you have people park to charge their truck? So this is one of the things we're really struggling with. There's all kinds of legal issues. There's opposition to, say, Caltrans providing this at rest areas because truck stops see it as competing with their business. So we really want to try to partner with the private sector to get public funding to truck stops and other places to be able to provide this charging for trucks or the hydrogen fueling infrastructure. And I won't go into all the legal issues, but it's a great challenge. This is also a transportation refrigeration unit trailer that has, I should say, a trailer that has a TRU, and this is solar powered, which is game changing because a lot of the refrigeration trucks you see now on the roads, they're diesel powered, and so these solar panels to help keep all the refrigerated goods cold. That's another aspect that we're looking at. If maybe trucks could plug in their refrigerated units at rest areas, but there's a lot of issues with standards, safety of the drivers with all the electrical equipment. So it'll be interesting to see how this all kind of develops. So I know some of you now are going to geek out on this part, as we were having conversation at lunch earlier about marine highways and how California doesn't really utilize them like other states do. That's not without trying though. So the federal government designates corridors that parallel interstate freeways along the waterways. So we have two in California, M5, which runs along the coast, and M580, which runs from Oakland inland to Port of Stockton and Port of West Sacramento. And we did a study looking at freight optimization, moving goods between the Bay Area and kind of the San Joaquin Valley, Sacramento Valley. So I'll take you a little bit into it. So one of the concepts we looked at is something that was done in the past but didn't really work out, and that's to move containers from the Port of Oakland inland to inland ports by barge instead of moving them by trucks. There's a whole host of reasons why you may want to do that, in like looking at air quality, congestion issues, maintenance on the roadways, but financially it's kind of a losing cause in a lot of ways in early years especially, and would probably require a pretty sizable government subsidy. But there are some reasons, and I know this might be hard to read, of why you may want to invest in that. One of the biggest ones actually is maintenance costs, and these numbers were super conservative, but it looked that Caltrans and local agencies could actually save a few $1 million per year by not having trucks beat up the roadways, switching to barge. And then on greenhouse gas emissions in the upper left, a barge can really help bring down those emissions. But you can see our trucks in this is comparing, sorry, I should say, this is comparing how it's done now by truck to barge, just barge, no rail. And so it's a little bit complex because tugs that would tug the barge sometimes are not as clean as trucks on the roadways, even though kind of as a whole in the world, water vessels tend to be cleaner. It's not necessarily the case in California. In 2045, we made the assumption that we would have cleaner vessels, so you can see some of these emissions come down. But even out to 2045, your hydrocarbons would be higher. So it's a little bit of a challenge. And so it's not a clear-cut thing, but I think it's good for freight resiliency to have multiple modes and corridors, so you have options. One thing really excited about, we worked with the Port of San Diego, the Port of Bellingham and Washington, and the Oregon Shippers Association, and now the Port of Umpqua in Reedsport, Oregon, to this M5 project designation. And what this does is allows us to go after federal funding to move goods by water along the Pacific coast. So the thought is that we'd move lumber from the Pacific Northwest that's going down to San Diego already, taking those truck miles off the roadway, putting them on barges. And then at the border at Otay Mesa, there's a lot of empty containers that are now moved by truck and rail to Oregon, primarily for the wine, I think for the wine industry in Oregon. So I think Pinot is a very popular wine in Oregon, if I remember correctly. So they're getting their containers by barge, and that will cut down on your truck and rail miles. And then we're looking at adding more stops along the West Coast. And so we're about to go out to bid on a project to see who would operate the service. So pretty excited about that. Just looking at the time, I think pretty good time. This is one of the things I'm most excited about that I was working on, is a freight resilience report. And this is going to feed into the California Freight Mobility Plan. But one of the things that we realize is that there's not a lot of discussion about freight resilience and how it can help in cases of wildfires. The pandemic really helped fuel this report more because, and Miguel can attest to, like, for a while I had to report every day on the impacts of the pandemic, like the COVID cases for dock workers, the fact that we couldn't get masks and protective equipment for port workers, those type of things. So we started to say, like, what are other things that we're not figuring out? And what we've really learned from this is that the freight planners or transportation planners don't really speak the same language as the emergency operators. And that becomes a problem in the case of these industries, because the emergency operators may call for trucks to do a certain thing, right, in an area, but they may send them into a place that a driver can't necessarily turn around, and drivers can get stuck. And even though you might be avoiding a fire or a snow area, it can be problematic. Other things that we learned, like talking to truck drivers, we found they really use our changeable message signs over the roadways to get alerts about upcoming issues. And when you've heard about these public safety power shutoffs, right, that the utility companies are doing, well, that takes out our signs, our traffic lights in a lot of places. And so a driver can't get alerted about high winds ahead. And there's places in California where if you go along these routes, your truck will be blown over. That's a little known fact, I think, especially like along the 395 corridor on the Eastern Sierras. So we have to get, even if we put out portable signs, they get blown over. So there's got to be ways to alert drivers that they're going into these high wind areas. There's all kinds of examples, like you can see right here, this is a Delta fire, right, on I-5. And you see this concrete barrier here. That became problematic when there was fire up ahead and trucks were trying to turn around and they couldn't. So they just had to abandon their trucks, and several of them got burned in the Delta fire. And so one of the things that we're looking at now is more swinging gates that emergency personnel can open and allow trucks to go to the other side of the roadway. So all kinds of interesting things we're learning through interviews. And then, of course, shout out to all of you at ITS and Miguel. We have a lot of research that we do together. And then actually my wife works for Caltrans in research, so she's been working with Miguel and stuff. One of them is freight economic competitiveness. Like I told you before, establishing those targets and then looking how we can preserve the market share of freight coming in and out of California. We have a Caltrans Sustainable Freight Academy coming up, where we really learn how to do more sustainable projects, how we do more planning, how the freight industry works, because we always have new planners coming in, and we can always do a brush up on that. And then economic competitive warehousing, Miguel's work in the middle there on spaceships and portal analysis. We have a goods movement system assessment that we did and we're continuing. And then Dr. Burke here at UC Davis was kind enough to take on my wild idea of looking at the cost benefits in providing battery charging for battery electric heavy duty trucks at roadside rest areas. Because I kept getting the question like, oh, let's put in this charging infrastructure here for trucks. It's like, well, we can't charge a fee for that because of some federal government prohibitions. So I wanted to know, how much is it going to cost us to eat these costs and provide that for truck drivers, and can the grid handle it, all these different things. So he was looking at that. We do multi-state coordination, work a lot with our neighboring states. We have monthly meetings with ODOT in Washington, Department of Transportation, focused on truck parking and zero emission primarily. We have some partnerships of alternative fuel corridors along the West Coast. We're partnering with truck stop operators up and down the coast to try to establish a West Coast electric truck corridor and try to get funding for that. There's been a lot of progress on that, so I'm really hopeful in the next year we could get some of these projects moving. We also do winter operation coordination across I-80 corridor through the winter states, so that way if the driver's coming in on 80 from the Midwest, they can see, hey, it's Donner Summit closed in California. I may have to head south on 15 down to Southern California, come up that way, to try to alert drivers ahead of time so they can make those winter decisions. And then coordinating on like truck parking, for instance, when Donner Pass closes in California, everybody's parking in the Reno area. So they have to come up with places for drivers to park. I think this is my last slide. So we get into talking about the future of freight. I'm really bullish on drones, unmanned aircraft systems. I think I talked with you about this before, Miguel, a few years back. But the technology's there. It's really about allowing for FAA regulations and such to allow these parcels to be going over places or without a visual line of sight. But you know, there's some things about energy use and that, but there's some cool things you can do, like say UPS has designed trucks that go out and you have a regular driver driving around, but they have a drone that connects to the top of the vehicle and can take packages out and be delivering as that truck moves around too. So you really got kind of two systems moving there. You've all seen parcel lockers. Truck platooning is where trucks can drive in close proximity to each other, and they're kind of automated where they can draft off of another truck to save fuel efficiency. Cargo bikes, there's some studies going on with that in the Bay Area, I believe, looking at how we could move more goods around in the Bay Area. I believe that you have at Davis some autonomous robots that deliver food, or at some point did. I don't know. Okay, Miguel says it.
We analyze them.
Oh, gotcha. I think they're in San Francisco and Walnut Creek as well. So we've worked with some of those companies a little bit. And then autonomous cargo handling equipment and trucks. It's just something that we keep a look on. And I know you're all looking at that as well. So with that, I think I'll turn it over to you all for any questions you might have.
Before we get that, do you want us to share your
Oh, my career art? Yeah. So as Miguel said, I grew up in the Midwest in Illinois. Always was a geek for transportation, probably like a lot of you. I wanted to go to the University of Illinois, mainly because sports, but it was a really good school to start out in civil engineering. Didn't like all the math and science. I switched to urban planning, fell in love, and said, oh, I want to go change the world, right? So September 11th happened, and if you think the job market was bad in 2008, I'm pretty sure it was worse in 2001. A lot of government jobs dried up, and there weren't like Planet Edison and all these sites that you could kind of see. So it's funny you said I worked in Florida, because I had never worked in Florida. I worked for the Miami Valley Regional Planning Commission, which is in Dayton, Ohio. So it's kind of a trick. It's the Great Miami River that flows through Dayton, Ohio. It's cool because I got to work on everything there. As a regional government, I worked a lot on trucking issues, the long range plans, walkable communities, helped establish their program there. They have probably the best bike trail system in the US. Shout out to Dayton, if you ever want to go take a ride. So I was dating someone who eventually became my ex-wife. She got a job out here. I followed her out here. That's how I landed in Sacramento. But I was working for a private sector company for a short time. I had my application in at Caltrans, and I got called up for an interview. It's like, for what? I didn't apply for anything, but they can share your application. So I ended up working at Caltrans, bicycle pedestrian stuff for a long time. I was like in the walkable neighborhoods that had all these websites and stuff, blogging. Really loved all of that. I went for the High Speed Rail Authority for a bit. I came back to Caltrans working on complete streets, technical things. Then I went to Caltrans District 3, which is kind of based in Marysville, and it covered the Sacramento region as well. I loved working there. I worked generically on a lot of transportation issues, a lot of what you saw here, and bicycle pedestrian things. But then I heard about this new sustainable freight branch at headquarters, and I really had an interest in freight. I went on a tour of the Port of Long Beach by boat, probably back in like 2008 or 2007. And I really loved it. I definitely encourage you all to go on a port tour and go see as many as you can, because the saying is, if you've seen one port, you've seen one port, which is totally true. They're all different from each other. Somebody, you're from Stockton. I love going on tours of the Port of Stockton. I've probably gone like 3 or 4 times. Love working with the port there. And so I encourage you to go see freight facilities if you get the chance. because I was like super into walking, biking, transit stuff. And now I've cut freight and I don't think I'd go back. I mean, I would if the right opportunity might come along, but to me, freight's so interesting, exciting, like it never changes, like something is always new, is coming along. Somebody's pitching a new technology to you every day. I think there's going to be some real game changers coming along in rail in particular. So I've been working in that office. That kind of switched around a few times, jobs in that office. And when I was working on the port congestion issues, I was doing a lot of work for CalSTA, the Undersecretary of Transportation there, and her staff. And they said, oh, we need somebody from Caltrans to just come and help us directly. There's a big proposal this year and the governor's budget to have $1.2 billion go to freight and port congestion related issues and zero emission technology. So it's probably the most significant infusion of freight funding ever into California. So it's really exciting opportunity. So I'm on loan over to CalSTA to help with that and probably be helping develop guidance for that program. So that's kind of my career arc of how I got to where I was. And I just encourage all of you to, the great thing about working at Caltrans is that you get access to all these temporary assignments. So I've had like, I don't know, 10 different jobs at Caltrans or something, just like short assignments. And every single one I took, some of them I was like, I didn't really want to do it, but somebody pushed me to do it. This one I actually did want to, actually, this one I had to be kind of pushed to do too, if I am being honest. So but I listened and I just encourage like you all to listen to peers and such when you get opportunities to take them, because it can lead you down to different paths that you might enjoy even more. Because it's kind of like a nice opportunity. You can go somewhere, check out the water, see if you like the temperature, and if not, then go back. And I think that's the great thing about state government. You can go anywhere. I've interviewed for jobs at other places I didn't get, but you know, over the course of my career, but like just the fact that I was able to maybe interview at a different agency without having to go back to school, get a different degree, like you can kind of hop in like different career arcs. Like I could go to California Air Resources Board, probably because I have freight knowledge or things like that. Vice versa, we trade staff back and forth between there. So there's a lot of cool opportunities in state government. What I don't like is the bureaucracy, just being honest. I hate paper pushing. That's why I work in freight, because I don't do as much paper pushing. I don't like a lot of the, like all these forms you have to sign and things like that. But you have a pension, you have a secure job, you get work with great people. So there's a lot of good benefits of that. So I probably wouldn't go to the private sector. I mean, I got golden handcuffs of pension, but there's good things about the private sector too. You get to work on a lot more sometimes, work with a lot of great people. But you know, I think I love the role of public service and serving the people of California. So sorry, that was kind of off.
Thank you. You have so great a lot. Anybody wants to move out of the dark side? I still have spaces in my freight class for next quarter. So questions?
Maybe a simple question. I see like trucks parked on the side of the road a lot. Is that because of these rules that they have to to take a 10-hour break after some of the time?
Yeah, it could be the breaks. They're also required lunch breaks typically. But a lot of times during the day, if you see trucks parked, it's because they're waiting to get into like a facility that doesn't have parking for them. Most of the parking that is happening at night is happening when we're asleep, to be honest. Like, I travel pretty late at night on the road sometimes, going up and down the state, and you don't always see the issues until it's like 12, 3 a.m. Then you can really see those parks. So one thing that I didn't mention is there's like at least 20,000 trucks conservatively parking around the state in these areas, just waiting to get into places too. So that's probably a lot of what you see as well. There's just no truck parking. There's no truck parking within 60 miles of the ports of LA and Long Beach, which you think about all these drivers coming in, waiting to stage and go out all these warehouses. They're just parking in neighborhoods or, you know, wherever they can find places.
Yeah. Do you know how many, like, you talk about the marine highways, like how much of like internal movement actually happens on the marine highways?
You mean in California?
Yeah, California.
Well, that's, I don't know too much about movement between the ports of like smaller vessels in California. I don't think it's very much. I think it's very little being moved. Now you do see like some of the, like say ships will move, the larger ships will move between the ports of LA Long Beach, we call them like the San Pedro ports, move between the port of Oakland. So they'll be like, Oakland will be like a second stop usually. But yeah, very little I think is actually moved on the waterways.
I do have a question online about the Marine Highway. Someone asked, on the Marine Highway for going green, would it moving more boxes short distance by rail be more impactful than barge? The network offers more coverage than the inland waterways and it's all in one place.
Yeah, that's something I didn't mention is about inland port opportunities for rail too. Something that we're working on. Caltrans has funded a study for Fresno Council of Governments that's looking at that. And totally agree that we're not using our rail infrastructure in California. There's a lot of reasons for that. One of them, as I understand, there's the market for, say, the larger railroads that you call them class ones, Union Pacific and Burlington Northern Santa Fe, BNSF. They tend to like longer distance, much longer than just within California for their revenue model. They make a lot more for hauling longer distances. It's a lot of work for them to set up shorter haul rail. And then there are short line rail opportunities in California. There's a large operator, Genesee in Wyoming. They do haul a lot by shorter rail trips, but it is, I think, somewhat difficult to get tracking space on the class one railroads for these shorter distances. And there's competition with passenger rail too, with Amtrak. And then just the infrastructure, it's kind of outdated for the short line rail, short haul rail, and needs a lot of upgrades. And that's kind of tricky to get because I think there's a delicate dance with public funds and private funds for these railroads. So it's something that we look at a lot. Our marine highway corridor study that we did actually looked at short haul rail, And one of the markets that we're looking at, I guess as a state, is between Oakland and Reno and Fernley, Nevada. There's some real potential there. A lot of goods are being moved between Oakland and Reno area. So hopefully we'll get an inland rail port concept moving soon, either to northwestern Nevada or the Central Valley. And I know we were talking about this earlier in Salt Lake City. They're setting up an inland port with I think it's the Port of LA, which I heard is a student informed me it's a big deal in Utah. So there is some of those opportunities moving forward. But good question.
So with the barges compared to trucking, are the barges being studied like the newest, cleanest technology? Is some of the benefit just from moving to a cleaner, newer technology compared to the existing trucks? Or is it inherent in the barge model that it would be better for greenhouse gas emissions?
We just assumed the current kind of tier engine that the tug service, that there was a prior service that ran in 2014. It unfortunately lost a lot of money that moved containers back and forth between Oakland and Stockton. So we just used that assumption. And I think in 2045, we assumed a tier 4, like cleaner engine. We are working with some companies on some technology that would be more zero emission and using wind power to move goods by barge. So there's some promise there. They use the same technology on ferries right now and want to move into the freight industry. But I think the main thing with marine highways to me is that zero emission is the end goal of a great service, but you have to make sure that your service pencils out and works in the real world, just not on paper, before you invest in zero emission technologies. You kind of just want to pick what they have available right now, because you don't want to buy all this equipment and not use it. And that actually happened with the prior Marine Highway Service. They bought equipment that didn't end up getting used. And it's funny, some of the equipment that was purchased for M580 is now going to be used for M5 up in Washington. But it was a hassle, I understand, trying to move that equipment from West Sacramento to Bellingham. So yeah, and all of our goals of talking about the Marine Highway, it's green. It's like, it's got to be green, but we have to make it work economically first before moving to those technologies. Because I would say, the Air Resources Board is really interested in marine highways because it's an area that's like a new technology development and another mode that we could start to work to go more green. So yeah, it's got a lot of potential.
Yeah, in that sense, I understand that usually marine highways and rail, usually need intermodal facilities to actually move from truck or other ones so that you can like put them there. So how many intermodal facilities maybe have been linked to the development of these projects? And like if you can tell us more about them, and also what type of freight would be more conveniently moved by these types of modes instead of by truck, like which one is better for these?
Yeah, so I'll try to remember all the parts of that. So yes, definitely need intermodal facilities. The problem with marine highways is that let's say you're moving goods from an ocean carrier, a container to a truck. You only need to move the container from the ship to the yard and then onto a truck. With marine highways, you have to move it from an ocean carrier to a yard. And there's some cargo scanning that has to go on too. So I won't get into all that issue, but there's like logistical hurdles within the ports. And then you have to move it again onto a barge, go to your destination, then it has to get handled again. So it's like the stevedoring cost, the handling of the cargo. It's double with the barge. There's another issue with that in that labor. I was talking with somebody at the table about this, that right now, I think in the union contract, that you would send out like a crew that you would use for one of those big ocean carriers to this tiny barge. And so it's just not efficient in terms of the labor usage. Now, there might be a way to negotiate that and all, I don't know. But that was part of some of the problem with the prior. In terms of goods, I think heavier goods that, let's say, I think rice might be one of the ones that might be a good example for around here, and that you can fill the containers more heavy, and if you can have them filled really close to the port or at the port and put them on the barge, because there's weight limits for trucks that of like 80,000 pounds. And so if you can move heavier goods, that way you don't have to use 2 truck drivers to go all the way down from the Central Valley to Oakland, sit at the port gates of Oakland, all the congestion in the Bay Area, come back. Like it might take you a whole day, whereas you could do probably like 3 or 4 runs to the port of Stockton or West Sacramento, where you don't have as much congestion, no waits at the gates. So I think there's a lot of potential for that. One of the biggest issues though is that it's a lot of work to move such a small amount of goods, especially at the beginning, that you really have to have somebody to want to make this happen. It's like a passion exercise, because it's not going to happen without advocates, because it just doesn't make a lot of sense from a business perspective for the larger good. There are certain shippers that are like dying to have this service. It would save them so much money, but is there enough of them? It's kind of hard to find out. Dude.
So from my understanding, like the majority of damage to roads comes from the weight of vehicles. So trucks cause disproportional damage to roads and are also that cost is borne by the governments, right? So I was thinking, as trucks transition to ZEVs, especially like powered by electric, like batteries, these trucks will get heavier and the damage to roads will probably be greater. So like I understand it doesn't make sense from like a business perspective to use marine highways. So like wouldn't the government want to would the government prefer like freight to move by barge and along the marine highways, especially as trucks get heavier?
Yeah, I think that's one of the main reasons why the federal government established, and it's called America's Marine Highways Program, and it's focused on short sea shipping, ferry movements as well. And yeah, exactly that reason. It's definitely, I think it's like 96,000 cars equals 1 truck in terms of damage or something. Somebody can post it in the chat or whatever to correct my math on that. But it's something crazy like that, and yeah, you're totally right that so that those maintenance costs that we were showing, those were like super conservative because there's a lot of debate about the true cost of how much damage a truck has on the roadway. UC Davis, I think, and Caltrans did a joint study on this, and if we use the numbers from that study, like that marine highway pays for itself like 10 times over, and we were like, we went with the more like conservative just for the model, you know, so that we didn't get like totally questioned. But yeah, it's real potential. Unfortunately, we just don't have the capability to use it like you can in like Tennessee and some of the other states, green highways. But yeah, I definitely know at Caltrans there's interest in it.
I mean, so like, if it works in like if it works like in areas like Tennessee, like what are they doing differently? Like what is the difference other than like the waterways has been like historically like built like that, but like
Yeah, I'd say that's the main thing. They just have a lot more river miles that were engineered to allow for the vessels to kind of go on. You know, places like the Ohio River and Mississippi River, Missouri River, they're really wide. You know, here in California, it's wide up to the Port of Stockton. There's the shipping channel that gets you up to West Sacramento. But beyond that, we just don't have wide or deep enough rivers. You'd have to dredge the rivers, like clear out all the mud to allow the ships to come through. In terms of why you don't see as much at the inland ports, I would say, well, you do, there is utilization of the ports. They have their specific niches. So like the Port of Richmond is very into like petroleum. And then Benicia is autos, big into that. Stockton does like rail and I think like gravel, a lot of like construction materials. Port Stockton does rice. West Sacramento does rice. Some other good. There's a lot of kind of niche things. Like they get, I think, some materials from like Russia and Malaysia and places like that. Like all kinds of, you know, construction material specific things. And then I think like ammonia and stuff. So it's kind of like about marketing. The whole thing about the containers coming in, it's because of that cargo handling that you got to do the 2 touches that it makes it very hard to compete against trucking. And really, that's kind of like the bottom line for the freight industry. Is like if it doesn't pencil out, you know, it doesn't work as much. But there's a lot of momentum right now to try to use those inland ports more than I've seen since my time working in freight. And so we'll see. But yeah, I think the ports are even less utilized than they were probably like 10 years ago. It's just kind of how the industry is like shifting a little bit, I think.
Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit about, considering the freight moves from the vessels to the warehouses and then ends in a home? What is the integration between, let's say, Caltrans state agency and the local jurisdictions for the planning of the entire longitudinal part of the movement?
Well, I would say at a regional level, I think a lot of it's looked at trying to have the best in modeling and data to be able to understand like the work that you're doing. Because I always say like for freight, like you should just throw out your regional models. If you're not accounting for like Toyota Corollas, delivering freight in all these smaller vans and things now, because it's just shifted so much with the last mile. There's been a general shift to more corridor planning. Traditionally, like Caltrans has done these, like, we do plans for like a whole route through a district. There was like a mandate to develop plans for all these routes. Now we're doing more toward like corridor and stakeholder engagement. And that's kind of geared toward, especially the SB1 funds, the Solutions for Corridor Congestion Program. So I'd say on a freight level, that probably gets included a lot in corridor planning. In certain corridors, I think there's more plans for freight, and you can see that, like, say around the 710 corridor between St. Peter Ports up to LA and the Inland Empire. But I think, just being frank, a lot more needs to be done in terms of freight specific corridor planning and looking at other opportunities. I was so excited that we got funding to do that N580 study, because we got to look at we did look at trucking as part of that, but and to see how we could move goods more efficiently by trucking, but the rail, the waterway. So I want to see more of that interregional corridor planning, and then the small region. In terms of getting to the door, you know, Caltrans isn't probably as much in that, you know, that kind of last mile freight, I think, is being more handled kind of at regional or local levels. But, you know, it's an area we have interest in. We just don't have like infinite staffing time to be able to get into it. So hopefully that kind of answered.
Thanks. Anyone? Well, thank you, Eric. Oh,
Right, just wondering, in all of the freight policy stuff that you're thinking of, I'm presuming there are some low-hanging fruits that are more like immediate priorities for the next, say, 5 years or so. What, in your mind, would be those priority areas across your entire thinking on sustainable freight?
For me, I'm not speaking for anybody else here.
Just you.
So my number one would be truck parking combined with zero emission, like battery electric charging, and if you could make it work, hydrogen as well. Invest at the truck stops, because that's where drivers prefer to park generally, because they have all the showers, the food. That's where they get their fuel. It just makes sense to go there, right, with the investments. So, but here's the big issue. In Southern California, near the ports, there's no truck stops. And so this is, in my mind, I've been thinking, like, is it going to come to, we're gonna have to knock down like buildings and underutilized spaces to build like truck stops and truck parking, because we have this 2035 mandate of zero emission drayage trucks, right? And we aren't, everybody's talking about those being battery electric, but in my mind, I just like, you have to change your whole model to be able to do that, right? Because right now a driver can just go fuel up, go to the port, wherever they need to go and distribute. Now they're gonna have to like figure out, okay, I gotta charge my vehicle somewhere overnight. They're parking it at their house, they aren't gonna be able to charge there. You need like a substation electrical infrastructure to be able to charge at your house, maybe, or something. So the model is going to change. There's this concept of trucking as a service, where you would have facilities where a driver would pay for like a lease, and they would rent space for their truck. They could charge it there overnight, and they would come back to that. So I think maybe maybe we'd see some of those facilities. Unless, this is a big one, if hydrogen comes along. If hydrogen can come along and fuel cell trucks really develop, I think that would be the biggest game changer of all, because then you can just swap out your fueling infrastructure for hydrogen. It takes about the same amount of time to fuel, and you just go with hydrogen trucks. But the technology is, as I understand, is still a bit lagging behind battery electric. I do think that, oh, you were mentioning about the weight of battery electric, and that is an issue, because if you can't allow these heavier trucks on the roadways, they have to reduce their payload. So they're not making as much revenue from those routes. So if you can get the battery technology and the density down to the point where you could, it's like this delicate balance of allowing the heavier trucks on the, or not having as heavy batteries, but being able to charge really rapidly and fast and have that storage and that range, then I think, you know, it makes more sense for battery electric. But I think we need parking spaces if we're going to be battery electric. Like, there's no other way, and there's just nowhere to park. So we're going to have to start building parking facilities, which is totally bizarre in my mind as somebody who's advocated for walkable communities and all these things. Like, why do we have all this parking? We should have walking, biking, transit. You know, we don't need parking. And now I'm like, yeah, we need truck parking. But it's true. I mean, you're not going to have truck drivers if you don't have places for them to park and charge and all of that. We're not going to meet our zero-emission goals if we don't have places they can park and charge or get hydrogen. So that's kind of mine. And then I love the marine highways concept. Like, I really, really want to see M580 work, and the inland port, rail port as well. So those are kind of my like things that I'm really interested in. But truck parking it could be really transformational, I think, and hit a lot of goals. So sorry for that long answer.
Thank you. Well, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.